Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Flooding is becoming an increasingly obvious mega issue in the world today. It costs anywhere between $200 billion and $500 billion in the US alone each year. They're 31% of natural catastrophes, and 1.8 billion people, about a quarter of the planet, live under flood risk. This is a nightmare for insurers who are raising their premiums in response, 17% last year in the US alone. But what if you could change the cost structure of this issue? Where possible, allow homes and businesses enough lead time to take high-value items out of harm's way, take the cars off the parking lot of the dealership and the goods off the warehouse floor. This can transform the insurance economics around flooding, and is exactly what Previsico is doing. Jonathan Jackson is an exceptional entrepreneur, now on his fourth company, and it was a pleasure to have him on The Fundamental Molecule to hear what he's building at Previsico and how he's building it. Please enjoy my conversation with Jonathan Jackson. Jonathan, it is really great to see you. How are you doing?
Very well indeed, Tom. Good to see you again too.
Excellent, excellent. We're going to dive immediately into it. I know that always sounds like a rubbish pun, especially given your area of expertise. But can you just walk us through where insurers are at the moment with respect to flooding? What does their world look like?
Their world is quite a worrying world because of the fact that as an insurer, you want to underwrite risks that you can have a reasonable understanding about. And flood is increasingly becoming unpredictable to a level which makes it very difficult for insurers to be able to take on that risk. And I think that's particularly true in the US market, where US flood is becoming such a substantial problem that clearly you've got insurers in places like Florida and Louisiana who are just pulling out of the market because they just can't handle the risk. In the UK, we're a bit more fortunate. We don't suffer quite the same degree of challenge that the US has around their flood. But still, it's a £1 billion a year problem that the UK faces. And again, with a changing climate, urbanization, the latest Labour government looking to put in 1.5 million new homes. That's just going to cause even more pressures when it comes to creating flood risk. So, insurers see flood as such an important risk to manage here in the UK, because by default, everybody is insured for flood. And the insurer has to specifically tell you that you're not insured, which is different from the US, where you start off without insurance and you have to actually ask the insurer to be insured for flood. So it's very, very significant difference.
Just to dive a layer deeper, because I think it's helpful for people to understand this. If you're an insurer, well, let's take the UK, for example, first. If you're kind of default on in terms of insurance coverage, how do people think about covering that risk internally? I mean, literally, what is going on inside the insurer? Do they attenuate with price? Is there some kind of technical, as you mentioned, like underwriting process? If you have to be insuring people by default, how do you then manage that risk from kind of a process basis? I just want people to understand what are the levers that can be pulled from the outside.
Flood risk for an insurer typically comes back to them looking at what's called flood risk maps. So a flood risk map estimates the flood risk of a particular property location. The insurer will look at that and say, okay, this particular location is maybe a 1 in a 500-year risk, but a location a few miles away may be a 1 in a 20. And that risk profile determines how the underwriter will look at that particular property.
Got it. I mean, you've mentioned the key thing, I think, to my mind, which is that, 1 in 100 years, 1 in 20 years, 1 in 5 years, which is pretty difficult to insure, obviously. But it just appears that kind of 1 in 500 years things seem to be happening all the time. Is this unpredictably, is this the core of the problem? And then how are the people who are working within insurers dealing with it? Obviously, you've mentioned Florida, et cetera. You can just turn it off and say, we can no longer do this. I just want to get into the thought process of the people who are managing this now wild swings in variability.
So I think from an insurer's point of view, they are, as I say, trying to make sure they understand the risk as best they can. And to your point is that you will find people who are in a 1 in a 500-year flood risk zone, but may have been flooded 3 times in the last 5 years. And part of this is actually just around how statistics are presented. People should not think of being in a 1 in a 100-year flood zone. They should think that they've got a 1% chance of being flooded, because that's actually the situation. It's that whole point, which is, unfortunately, it can be year after year. You could still be flooded because you do have a 1% chance every year. It's really about how that statistic is communicated. And unfortunately, the 1 in a X number of years naming convention has just dominated the industry.
Because it sort of comes out, it's just easy to wrap your head around, but it's like, it's one of these sort of astonishing like set of statistics, right? There were, whatever, 8 billion people in the world. Like 1 in 100 is a lot of people. Like 1 in 100 stuff happens all the time.
Exactly, yes. And, you know, that's the way to look at it, is that if you were told that you had a 1 in 100 chance of having a car accident, would you drive your car? You'd probably think about it a fair bit, because you think, you know, that's not a great stat. So it's all about how you look at risk.
Yeah, you'd certainly drive better. Well, certainly better than I do anyway. That's really helpful. So, I mean, you've started to touch on this, but maybe just drill a little bit deeper into the differences between the UK and the US. I mean, we're obviously going to get into what Previsico does, but just to kind of give us, to stay with this landscaping idea, what have you learnt about the US market that is clearly distinct from the UK market, which is where obviously your grounding is and where you're based? Is there anything that's particularly surprised you as to the difference?
I think the really key difference for me is the fact that we are typically working with large organizations. So the likes of National Grid, who run the UK's electricity network. They're also operational in Massachusetts, New York State, Burger King. So these sort of organizations clearly have lots of assets. In the UK, the nature of UK flood, as I say, is a significant problem. You know, £1 billion a year to flood is not small. But fact is that risk is seen as being manageable from the underwriter's point of view. And what typically is happening is that with those large organizations, those organizations can get insurance. It's a question about how they want to negotiate that insurance and how much they choose to put into the actual carrier's side of the business versus they may want to retain and self-insure that risk by themselves. So that's really quite an interesting dynamic where they have genuine choice. In the US, they don't have the choice. In the US, just talking to a US insurer recently, and they were saying they had a data center with $1 billion property insurance value, and they had to have a flood limit of $10 million. And they said, we are not going to move from that flood limit. That's the maximum we'll ever pay out of that property. Not willing to take any more risk on it. That's a data center hasn't got any other choice. They have to self-insure.
And by self-insure, what do you mean?
So the very simple description is that literally you have to put your own hand in your pocket if you have a loss.
It's just not being insured. It's so interesting. It's like, yeah, we're going to self-insure. Wait, yeah, you mean you're just not going to have insurance, and then whatever happens, happens, and you're just going to pay for it out of cash?
Indeed. What a lot of companies do is they self-insure via a thing called a captive, which is actually their own insurance company. So they create their own insurance company and use that to help them manage the risk. And so that's a really popular vehicle. And, you know, in the US, it's pretty much dominates the market around flood because, as I say, insurers are so reluctant to underwrite the risk in so many locations.
I mean, is that a legal thing? Is that a tax thing for like?
There are. You're going into an area now.
It's probably quite new for you. This is unfair because you've only just started market entry. Anyway, so my curiosity is getting.
But what I will say is, it is literally them creating their own insurance business. So they effectively typically will say to their operating business, "Okay, your deductible is $10 million. You pick up that first $10 million in the operating side of the business." Once you go above that 10 million, we will then pick up the risk.
We're the ones sticking it. Exactly. And so it can be managed independently. That makes a lot of sense. So taking it into Provisico, how do you describe the specific problem that you are solving within kind of the insurance stack?
very simply, we talk to the fact that it's known around the world that if you can provide organizations with a timely and accurate flood warning, you can mitigate at least 50% of flood loss. We have worked in Lloyd's of London's lab, it's actually where I'm sitting today, with various underwriters. So we have Munich Re, Liberty, and HM underwriters work with us to help us model out how we could mitigate loss for the underwriter. And they actually came to the conclusion that if you had Previsico's service, along with a good flood plan and flood resilience measures, they actually felt you could get to 70% commercial loss prevention. From an underwriter's point of view, their KPI is their loss ratio. That's how you can reduce those losses. And so that is really where we fitted within the insurers, is helping them manage those losses and therefore, improve their profitability.
So treating me like the family Labrador, easy thing to do, I think, John.
Shall I pat you on your head?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll wag my tail. And so literally, how are you preventing that loss? What is it that you are allowing them to do that they weren't able to do previously that means that the KPIs of all of the people get better and the insurers get happier?
Effectively, what we're enabling is the insurer will talk to their client and they'll say to their client, we recommend that you use Previsico's service because this will help you mitigate your losses. And that's a really positive conversation, because that conversation happens when the client has actually got flood losses, typically.
So it's after they've been exposed to it, because usually people just don't think it's going to happen to them, but then it does, and it's terrible, and they never want it to happen again.
Correct, yes. And so a great example of this is the Burger King example. We were introduced to Burger King by Liberty because Liberty had real concerns around a small number of their sites. Liberty then supported getting the service into Burger King. Burger King then saw the value of the service. They were able to mitigate some significant flood losses. As a result, their CFO has then said, okay, this is great. We now want to look at it. So that's the classic way in which we work with an insurer, help them support their clients, help their clients get better at managing risk. So it's a win-win all around.
And the process of mitigation is, I mean, are we talking sandbags? Are we talking kind of like flood defenses? Are we talking inflatable sort of booms? Or like, what are the practical steps that you allow these, like a Burger King franchise holder, kind of to take to minimize the claim?
All of the above are true. So all of those that you mentioned, Tom, do work. We would probably put sandbags at the bottom level in terms of effectiveness, believe it or not.
Absolutely. Everybody always thinks about sandbags and it's garbage.
They are better than doing nothing. So yes, effectively, you typically have two types of flood defenses that you could buy. One are permanent flood defenses, where literally you're putting in walls, etc., to protect against flood. The other way is in deployable flood defenses. So those can be inflatable flood defenses and other devices that help manage flood. What we also have seen, the more we work in the market, is some very neat ways to manage flood. So the one that always makes me smile the most, which I think is great, is that we were told by Anglian Water here in the UK, they actually put beavers on a river because the river was coming down into a town and it's causing floods. So they actually put beavers to build dams to prevent the water coming down, which I love. We don't tend to get into the beaver side, but where we do is what we do see ourselves doing increasingly now is working with organizations to automate. Again, going back to Burger King, they had a particular problem with groundwater flood in one of their stores, and they had a pump already installed, but it required manual intervention. So we put our sensor into the basement. So as soon as the sensor goes off, it automatically triggers the pump and therefore removes the flood water from the basement. So solutions like that, as I say, we see as being really the way forward, where we can automate effective defense through that combination of our early warnings and those defensive mechanisms that organizations can invest in.
I love that. I hope everybody listening to this has got kind of like the image of beavers with Anglian Water kind of high-vis jackets on, kind of like marching around, making their...
Wonderful, isn't it? Yes.
It is nature's flood intervention, and I think it's great. You mentioned the ground truthing and the sensors. There are a lot of people looking at kind of data from the world, and I want to go into kind of exactly how the genesis of this from your two technical co-founders. But one of the things that does separate you is that you use a hardware to ground truth it, which for most people is like timeout, hands off. No, we can't do this. Like everything has to be hands off and lines of code only. Like, why did you zig when others are, well, pretty much everyone else is zagging?
It comes back to looking at ROI from the client's point of view. The client needs to see true effectiveness. And for us, the power that we have is through combining our software as a service forecast with our sensors. So the forecast is giving up to 48 hours notice of the risk of flood, but it is just a forecast. In other words, it is not guaranteed. So this is designed to help organizations prepare for flood. So to the earlier point, if you've got deployable flood defenses, you need time to set those up, to organize them, etc. So the forecast prepares you for flood. But if you're going to take those really big decisions, like we are going to evacuate a building, we're going to close a production line, you need to have really, really high confidence that that flood is going to be hitting you. And that's where the sensors come in. Because as you say, we place the sensor, the source of flood, so it acts as ground truth. And therefore, having prepared for the risk of flood, when you get those sensor warnings, you know you now need to put your flood action plan into place and take those big actions, but you're doing it with very, very high confidence.
Yeah, rather than having a bunch of false alarms, which leads to people not doing them in the end at the time when they actually need to, because we're human. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So in terms of the core data, can you just walk us through the thought process that led to the kind of the initial establishment of the idea before you got involved? Was there a kind of an arc of understanding, or have you ended up in a slightly different place from where you started? How did your co-founders or the founders think about this?
Yes, well, having sort of started up 3 businesses prior to Previsico, I have to say this is completely unique in my experience as a startup, in as much that the genesis of the business is the fact that the UK government back in 2015 recognized they had a huge problem when it comes to flood. They were providing flood warnings for main river and coastal flood, but when it comes to surface water or stormwater flooding, best thing they had was a weather forecast. As we all know, weather forecasts aren't always that accurate.
We are British, they are our favourite thing, and they are often wrong.
Indeed, indeed. They're not particularly good at forecasting flood either. So what the government said is we need to get surface water, stormwater flood forecast in place. So they came to the university and met with Department, as I say, one of our co-founders, who's a world leader in flood modelling. And they asked Department to take on the task. They invested about £1 million worth of research funding into the university to help develop the CS. And then by the end of 2018, they said, congratulations, you've cracked it. At that point, the university saw that they had a great opportunity to do a spin out. And I was just very fortunate, the right place at the right time. I was the Royal Society's Entrepreneur in Residence at the time in the university, met Depang and Abby, the 2 academic co-founders, and they very kindly invited me to come on board and spin it out, which we did in January 2019.
It kind of begs the questions about the commonality of experience. You've obviously spun up you founded and grown 3 businesses kind of beforehand, but this was again, a kind of like a unique experience for you. I'm just wondering about the dynamics of not starting necessarily from a clean kind of sheet of paper, or did you feel like organizationally you were starting from a clean sheet of paper and so it wasn't too difficult? Like, just take us into kind of that reality of joining another team rather than you being, Genesis, as people say.
Indeed. So it is different. You're absolutely right, Tom. In previous businesses where either you've had the idea yourself or you're working with co-founders who've had the idea and taking that idea and then developing it. The real positive piece with Previsico was we actually had our first customer, which was the UK government. They'd invested £1 million in research funding into it, and we had our MVP. So those were great.
You don't have to do all of that stuff.
Exactly. So it's like, woohoo! This is very good news.
This is great. Step G.
Then it becomes an interesting journey, though, because you are now doing a spin out from a university, and it's a very different environment to having some co-founders who are all entrepreneurial and understand the journey ahead. And I think we've been really lucky because both Depang and Avi have adapted to commercial life really well. And it's been a great journey with them. But it is a very different world when you do a spin out to doing a traditional startup, that's for sure.
Yeah, they do appear to have taken it to a remarkably well, because often it's a real problem. What do you think has served them well? Because as people listening to this who are thinking either taking on joining the university spin-outs or whatever it is, it often can be enormously problematic. From your observation, what have they done well? What has allowed them to be kind of as effective as they are as they move from academic to commercial? Because it is by no means a simple leap to make.
It's absolutely not. And I think that the first thing is that they have been really good in terms of their self-awareness. They've recognized where their skill sets are and therefore been able to take on board the facts of bringing in a CEO to start off with. If you're a founder, typically the founder will be the CEO. That they took the decision that they saw that they needed to bring in somebody with commercial experience and who started their own businesses in the past. So that, I think that was huge kudos to them for both recognizing that needed to be done and not just recognizing it, but actually supporting it as well. So I have to say, from the time I started, I never had resistance, any major challenges when it came to them acknowledging the fact that the commercial side was an area that they had a gap in and that it needed to be filled. And so as we've added other people into the team as well, again, they've really understood that and accepting of it. And that has really helped us to grow the business very successfully. I think I have definitely stories told to me where
it's not quite a sunlight and rainbows.
Definitely, yes. Less enjoyable than the one that I've had.
Yeah, sure. A characteristic understatement. Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So take us through the beginning of the commercial journey. How did you think about establishing a foothold in the market? And practically, what allowed you to get those first points on the board? What did that look like?
Yes, I mean, the interesting thing for us was the work that we did with the government meant that we were plugged into a whole range of different organizations. So lots of local government organizations and public sector organizations, but importantly also into commercial organizations who are critical to the UK infrastructure. So British Telecom, who runs the UK's telephone network, National Grid, etc., Network Rail. So we did have those connections into the commercial world, which was really helpful. And we started to therefore understand those pain points from a commercial side. Purely the fact that I've only ever built businesses, private sector businesses that sold to the private sector. In other words, selling to public sector is not my bag.
Yeah, totally new.
I was immediately looking at where is the private sector opportunity. And it was really clear that insurers were the ones who were actually experiencing the biggest pain. When it comes to, as mentioned earlier, in the UK here, it's the insurer who's picking up the tab for the most part. So it was then that whole piece about recognizing, okay, great, we've got this fantastic market. London is the fourth largest market globally for insurance. So you've got all the big players. They're all contained within literally one postcode as well within central London. So it's a very tight-knit community. So really great positives. Downsides are these are really big organizations and they're really slow to move. So it was that whole battle about, okay, we know where the pain is. We've got this really very easily identifiable markets, very tight knit, but now actually, how do you get them to move? And so you mentioned about starting at the time of COVID. That was an interesting experience. The good news for us was that literally 2 months after COVID hit, we were told we'd been accepted into Lloyd's of London's lab. So we were in the accelerator program, which is, as I referred to earlier, we were working with Munich Re, Liberty, HM underwriters. And that was a game changer for us. It really was. They were great at giving us their time, helping us to understand where our value proposition lay. Because originally we'd come into insurance thinking we were more claims focused. We would help them with their claims. We realized from going into the lab, we were underwriting focused. We were all about helping them manage those loss ratios. So that was a really pivotal experience for us. And then from that, we were in some really interesting discussions with Zurich, but felt we just needed something to get them over the line. As I mentioned, insurers are not the fastest to move. And I know my friends at Zurich will not be too upset with me sharing that with you. We talked to them and then we were lucky enough to realize that actually BT was one of their customers. And so we said to BT, well, look, we've obviously done some work with you. How about doing a trial with Zurich? And so sure enough, that's what happened. And that was the way that we got into Zurich. And now Zurich is our largest customer, I'd like to say.
Fantastic. So it was really because one of the things that differentiates you, getting to work with insurers is really sort of defined by kind of patience and worrying away at it, I think, certainly from our observations, and making sure that you are working on a pain point that they clearly care about, which you really do. By the way, I used to work about 100 yards from where you are sitting down St. Mary Axe, opposite the entrance to the Gherkin. So I know the insurance land well. It's amazing how the pubs fill up on about 11 o'clock on a Thursday morning and then don't empty until the weekend starts. It's crazy. Yes. It's a fascinating world. It really is enormously esoteric. But it kind of feeds into this idea. These are a group of people that really need to be understood on a very, 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 very deep level. And the relationships need to be built. And you've done that really remarkably well. You said a little bit about it, but are there any other kind of generalized pointers that you would advise people to follow when they are trying to build relationships with people who perhaps take a long time to kind of move, or that they have a specific way of doing things, maybe skeptical of new technical approaches to what they're doing? Because obviously, actuaries and the other participants in the underwriting process they're really good. They're really smart, but the addition into their process is quite a difficult nut to crack. What have you learned about building those kinds of partnerships that you think others could learn from?
I think one of the most important things is to recognize that when you're dealing with these very large businesses, there's no one person who's going to make a decision. So you have to look to identify all the key players that you need to involve to get yourself over the line in that decision. So for us, we will always look to try to identify the person who's really experiencing the main pain in that particular client. So in the case of the insurer, as I mentioned, it's the underwriting side. But you then start to drill into, well, what aspects of underwriting have the greatest pains? So for instance, certainly both utilities and construction are two underwriting sectors which are very acute when it comes to having flood issues. So it now starts to really dig into that. Then what you've got to recognize is that actually the conversations that take place around the client's risk are typically done via the risk engineering team. So therefore you need to make sure that you're engaging with them so that they understand the proposition, how it works, how the support makes. It is just them working, as I say, through all these different parts of the organization to make sure that you are connecting the dots. And then the overriding thing to me is always about being really clear and simple in terms of what it is you're looking to provide and be able to demonstrate a clear ROI. So, we are a scientifically led business. The science of flood is incredibly complex, way above my paid grade, by the way, Tom. The department I hold in great esteem for is
that's all right. I feel you.
Capacity. So for me, one of the key things about what we do is to take that brilliance that DuPont has in developing its flood models and just simplifying it right now so that when people are buying something from us, it's a very, very easy thing for them to get their head around. So if they can really understand how you're helping them fix that problem of theirs, and then giving them the financial justification for going to the business and saying, we need to find budget for this because this is compelling.
I really love that. It reminded me of like three things all at the same time. Firstly, people don't care what's in the box. They just care what the box does. And then the other one is this idea of like making sure that there is absolutely no way, especially your early customers, they can't miss even a cent or a pence of the value that you have provided.
Correct.
And then also, do not trust internal stakeholders to sell internally for you. You have to literally do it for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
The layers of doing it. And people are kind of scared of it. I don't know why people are scared of long and complicated sales cycles, because everyone else is going to have to do it. What you're literally creating is a moat. And so, yeah, I think there's a huge amount of insight into what you just said, where I really appreciate it. So as they say here, you are about to walk and chew gum. So you've still got the UK market where you're building admirably fast, I would say, but you're also taking your first steps into the US market. As a CEO, how do you think about balancing the benefits and risks of doing that at this stage? You guys have developed, you're at about, the equivalent of, 3 million ARR, you're in good shape, but it's still an undertaking to go and establish yourself in a new market at this stage. How have you thought about it as the principal decision maker?
The first thing is that if you're going to go into an international market, you need to be really clear that there is a compelling reason for doing so and that there genuinely is a market. There is a long list of UK companies that have tried to go into the US and have sadly not succeeded. Fortunately, not being one of those, but being very aware of that being the case. One of the things that we've been very cautious about is to make sure that actually our entry into the US has been client-led. So the fact is that we're dealing with these large insurers, we're dealing with large commercial organizations. They're saying to us, Previsico, great that you're doing stuff in the UK, We really love working with you here, but you know where we really need you? We need the US.
We have a big problem over here.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. So it literally is as simple as that, Tom.
Yeah, I suppose that definitely makes a ton of sense. I want to take you back into your data room before we did our investment. One of the things that we were all really struck by, because I think it's the first time that we've ever seen it, and it's actually something that when Marissa built our kind of what we call the BIV Cathedral, that we refer to all the time in Notion, and it's kind of amazing, absolutely invaluable. But in the middle of front of kind of page one are what we call our kind of culture Bs, which are B, X, Y, Z. But you'd written them down on a piece of paper, but it kind of went beyond culture. It's not only kind of a brand positioning statement in very, very simple language. It was kind of an expectation about who we are and what we're about and what we want to kind of exude to the world. It was kind of an interesting manifestation of these things that can be slightly hackneyed and feel like they're kind of lip service and nobody does anything else to it. But it felt very real. Can you just walk us through why you built it, how you built it, how you thought about it, what it is, and why it's helpful? You don't need to remember all of those questions, but just directionally.
Thank you. I made you with the odd reminder. The story is that when I was introduced to Department Abbey, Loughborough University, first conversation I remember having with them was, look, this flood is such a huge problem. And I said, clearly this is something which is going to help humanity. Flood is just going in one direction and it's really, really scary. And I said, you could look to start this business as a not-for-profit, as a social enterprise. I said, or you could choose to start it as a commercial business. And at the time, I was wearing my entrepreneur in residence hat. So trying to be very objective about the options available to them. So they said, well, what's the difference? So I said, well, in a not-for-profit, obviously you are focused just on helping people. You're obviously not looking to take profits out of the business. So therefore everything that you earn continues to be funneled into that. And they said, okay, that's great. And so then we talked about doing it as a commercial business. And so I said, the value of a commercial business is that we will be able to raise funds. By being able to raise funds, you can then grow that much faster. Your shareholders who you've raised funds from to expect return on investment. But fundamentally, it's all about how quickly we can get out there and grow this. If you want to help as many people around the world as possible, in my eyes, taking the commercial approach is going to be the one which will enable you to do the most, but in the fastest way. And I said, social enterprise is still absolutely valid. But I said, firstly, is I wouldn't be the right person for you because I've never done that before. I don't know how to do it. So, you need to find somebody else. But also, I just really felt that they would find that difficult. And, we all agreed that building this business to help everybody around the world was going to be cool to us. So in me coming on board, that was something that I really felt passionate about. And is actually, having told my wife that having done 3 startup businesses, I wasn't going to do a 4th.
Never again.
Exactly. Having to then I had to have a good reason to go back to it and say, I just need to do one more.
This one's good.
More.
Yeah.
So I lucky enough to get permission to do so. And so from that, where we all 3 of us just said it's so important that we grow this, help everybody. That became our vision. Our vision was based around was to take it on a global basis. And the other part of the vision, which has really helped us, was the fact that we knew the evidence from whether it be the EU, the World Bank, the United Nations, in terms of flood warning, being able to deliver the ability to reduce flood loss by 50% or more, was absolutely unequivocal. So therefore, the whole point of the business is that we are focused on the fact that 50% flood loss reduction is a huge, huge number, but we know it's achievable. It's not a number we've just plucked out of the air. It's actually defensible. Therefore, driving this on a global basis is actually the key, because we know we can deliver the 50%. We just have to get it out there to as many people, to support as many organizations and countries around the world as we can. So that has been the sort of the North Star for us. And then from that, we wanted to develop some values as a business. And so we developed 3 values that we focus around. The first is fairness, which everybody thinks, well, everybody wants to be fair, but actually
not everybody.
Fairness to you is maybe different to how I would view fairness, which is maybe different to how Marissa would view fairness. So we've actually invested in some work by an academic to help. We now have a company survey where every year we evaluate how fair we are. So we have 36 different questions, and we come out of that and understand, are we behaving as a fair organization? We then have purpose as our next value. And again, this comes back to the fact is we are looking to help the world. That is so important to us. The fact that we are able to have people who come back to us and say, wow, you've managed to save me suffering a flood is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. When you know that you've helped somebody save their business, save their home, just an amazing feeling. And that's something which that purpose binds us really together. And then finally, it's creativity. And because to us, that we have to be creative. We come out of science. Science is about creativity. We are a science-based business. We need to continue to be creative in everything that we do. It's not just about the science. It's about how we work with our customers, how we work with our suppliers, how we work with each other. And every part of the business has the opportunity to be creative. It doesn't matter what you do. Everybody can be creative. And we really want that to be impressed upon everybody as a value as well. So those three values are really the core to our business. And every time we induct anybody into the business, I have a session with them, typically talking them through exactly what I've just shared.
Yeah, we do the same. They're usually confused about the presence of lots of bees for us. But by the end, I think
we avoided that problem.
In January, they get it. They're like, wait, am I joining an apiary? What's going on? That's really cool. And it's really impressive. And it really shines through, actually, through the DNA, everybody we've spoken to within the organization. I think it feels very aligned. As I say, we were just so struck by the quality and the clarity of what was written down and placed in the data room so people could really understand what you're about. And it also struck us how rare it is for us to see something like that. We don't have very many full-time founders on the fundamental molecule, but we do today. So this is a particularly important final question from us, which we ask all our guests. And that question is, if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
Stick with your knitting. The fact is, the water market is huge. There's so much opportunity. And I think I've seen a lot of businesses who try to do too much and they haven't really focused and just said, this is what I'm an expert in. And I'm going to go really deep on this. So I'm a great believer in you pick where you see your greatest value proposition and you really develop that and work that really, really well. And just to put it in the context of what we're doing is that we are providing flood warnings. We have people approach us and say, well, this is great you're doing on flood. Why don't you look at wildfire? And it's like, yeah, that's a really amazing area, but we know nothing about wildfire.
I mean, sure.
know that.
I'm
not really not there. So it's that whole piece about, in the water market is so huge. And I just look at it as we work with water utilities. And I've been staggered at how our proposition to those utilities has grown over time because we've just stayed focused on talking to those guys and really understanding their business. So originally we started off around helping them mitigate loss through an early warning so they can take action to defend against a flood. But actually we've moved much more now into how do we provide the data from a flood event to then help inform where their preventative maintenance should take place, which has then taken us into the whole world of their combined sewage overflows, which is where they are taking wastewater and stormwater down the same pipe. And of course, when stormwater overwhelms the pipe, they have to release the wastewater, and that's going into
it's a beast,
etc. And the more that we are working with the water companies, the more opportunities we see for them to get value out of our service. So that's a great way for us to grow as a business. Our clients are growing exponentially year on year with us. And that's because we are really focused about just doing one thing really well, which is providing fantastic flood warnings to help people in their business.
Really fantastic. I love that you chose stick to your knitting because I get accused a lot at work of having kind of Tomisms. And some of them are me, but a lot of them are just the UK. And sticking to your knitting is one of those. I was like, what was you talking about knitting for? No, it's great. That's absolutely fascinating. I want to get that either. That's going to get written on my wall. I love it. This notion of focus and really developing a core strength that makes you difficult to compete with is such an important one. Jonathan, this has been predictably an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being on The Fundamental Molecule.
You're most welcome, Tom. It's been great to be on and really enjoyed it.
Cheers, sir.